Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the 48th OIC session, that moot that was held in Islamabad on the 22nd of March 2022. Around 32 foreign ministers from various Muslim countries along with around 700 delegates were part of this moot. Prime Minister addressed today, and in fact the major theme was perhaps about the unity, justice and development, but Islamophobia was one of the most important subjects. So was the case regarding the Kashmir as well as Palestine, and also Afghanistan was a part of discussion. Now the interesting part is that since Pakistan is holding this very important moot, we've also held it a couple of times before, but if you remember, a few months ago, there was another extraordinary session of the OIC that was held particularly for Afghanistan. So I think a great job as far as the government is concerned to gather such distinguished guests and in fact raise the real concerns of the Muslim Ummah. Now, before I go into the detail, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio, on my right is Ambassador Farukh Amil Saab, who is the former ambassador and chair of OIC Geneva. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And we have with us Dr. Professor Zafar Nawaz Jaspal Saab. He's an expert on foreign affairs and international relations. Dr. Saab, thank you so much for your presence as well. And on Skype, we have with us Ms. Helga Zepp Larouche. She's the founder, chairwoman of Shiller Institute. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time as well in our program. And we'll also be talking to Dr. Huma Baqai, who is a senior analyst, and she's going to join us in, say, another 20 minutes or so. So let me start off from you, Mr. Farukh Amil Saab. Sir, Islamophobia, this phenomena existed post 9/11, though it was there before also, but you know, the real effect of it was witnessed right after that. Muslims were blamed, Muslim countries were attacked in the name of liberation and democracy. But sir, at the end of the day, what we have witnessed during the last 22 years, that this was fueled, this phenomena became a problem, and even innocent Muslims were killed by the whites. There are so many examples. You can talk about what happened in New Zealand, when around 50 people were killed, brutally murdered by a white man. But sir, the question is, you know, whenever I get to read about crime committed by a white man, that would be considered in the category of hate crime. Whereas if a Muslim picks up a stone and throws on an Israeli tank, that little 10, 12-year-old kid is considered as a terrorist. Do you think, sir, such moots, such huge gatherings, especially of the Muslim Ummah I'm talking about, where this issue was discussed at length, that kind of an effort would be able to erode that very unfortunate concept of Islamophobia? So let's start off from there.
Well, thank you very much, Faisal Saab. There's more than one question there, but let me just start with the issue of Islamophobia. Of course, Islamophobia has been around for a long, long time. And it became the crescendo of hatred and anti-Muslim feeling grew, as obviously, especially after 9/11. But what I would say is that in the context of the current conference, the CFM that's taken place, I think it was a landmark resolution that was adopted, and it's on the anniversary of that horrific terrorist outrage that took place in New Zealand. So 15th of March is a very important day that is etched into the minds of Muslims around the world as a day of hate and evil. So Islamophobia, when the OIC talks about it, it's very important, and if the OIC actually sets up there is already an observatory on Islamophobia, but a special rapporteur that could go around and become a voice in other places is extremely important. Now, of course, the racism exists everywhere. I would say that if you look at the current the tragedy of what is taking place in the Ukraine, and the reports coming from people of color, South Asians and Africans, how they've been treated by at the border
non-whites.
At the border cross, well, mind you, lots of Syrians are white people as well, and the Turks are as well, but and the Afghans. But it's a fact that they were Muslim. much more. A lot of blue and green-eyed people in Syria and in Turkey and in Afghanistan. But the point here was that so many of the refugees had a different kind of treatment. And compared to the unfortunate souls who were stuck on the Belarus-Polish border. And the irony here is, given that it's Poland, it's a friendly country, but Pakistan, if you remember, had given, in 1948, had given sanctuary to Polish refugees that came to Pakistan. And so we as a country have always been had an open heart for everybody. So for Pakistan to be that has steered this resolution, I think it's a very important achievement. But the achievement has to go further. And as with all the other things, and I guess we'll talk about this, what the OIC does, it becomes tangible and implementable. It's no use just crying about it. Somebody has to do something about it. And if there's racism and there's Islamophobia, it is extremely important for the Muslim, the Ummah to speak up as one. And I think if there is one issue, there are plenty of issues that divide the Ummah, we all know that, but there is one issue that Pakistan has shepherded, is the issue of Islamophobia. And I think that is an important start. And that ties in with the whole concept of unity, because there are many fissures across the Muslim world. So I think if there's one thing that puts critics of the OIC on a defensive is the issue of Islamophobia, because where would they hide to defend, to speak against it? Because it exists. So they have to agree on this. And within the OIC, everybody across the South, all this, in Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe, they've all experienced this because primarily they are Muslim. So I think it's very important to look at it in that context. But equally, I must say this, on balance, what has happened is that many of the West European countries, and I would bring in Chancellor Merkel as the shining example, she took 1 million Syrians and Afghans. They opened their doors as well. So we must be very careful about rushing to judge everybody with the same brush and saying, well, you did this.
But sir, there was another reason for that also. A lot of people do believe, and it's a fact also, that like we have a very young population on an average. Like it is believed that around 65 to 68% of the total population of Pakistan is well under the age of 30. It's a young population, whereas it's the other way around in countries like Japan or, for example, in Germany. So they want those workers to be inducted. I mean, they were not treated as refugees, but refugees came in and they wanted them to become a part of their workforce, wasn't it?
Well, this is the argument that Marine Le Pen had. This is exactly what she said when Merkel was taking all the former chancellor was taking all the Syrian refugees. She said they're solving their employment issue. I mean, that is a very disingenuous and maybe a sarcastic way of looking at it. But if they were solving their labor shortage, then they would have a time limit when they could go back. They're all still there. So the thing is, they had done that. Of course, there's going to be pockets of racism. That is going to happen. But anyway, that's an aside. I didn't want to make that the main point. The point here is that Islamophobia is real. It is being fueled by global corporate media. And if you see, I think we've all seen the channels, the mainstream channels, having people on talking as if, well, sarin gas, but it happened to the Syrians and it happened to XYZ in Muslim countries, but it's happening to Europeans, as if we are less. So that is very much there. And so when responsible, respectable global corporate media hosts people like this, they only add to the issue of Islamophobia. And I think it is the very clear purpose of the OIC through now this resolution to say, right, that you're not going to do that and get away with it.
All right. Now, Dr. Saab, since you're a professor of IR, sir, and somebody, who really understands what's going on. Now, so if you remember, whether we talk about Boko Haram or we talk about Daesh, ISIS, let's say Taliban, in one way or the other, they were also considered that way. But I'm saying that these organizations, they came out, and eventually what happened, what we witnessed, that the true picture of the religion, which is known as Islam, wasn't the representation what they were up to. Killing people, brutally torturing the children even, picking up women, raping them, marrying them. Look what happened to Yazidis in Iraq, and then you talk about Syria. I mean, the way they have destroyed, and now they are in Afghanistan. What I'm saying is, these people were financed, they were trained, and they were supported in all the forms by the Western world, sir, and that's a reality in most cases. And that image of Islam, that beautiful image of peace, that was eroded over a period of time. Exactly, sir. Don't you think that was all by design?
If you ask me if I can try to see it or answer your question with a more theoretical and practical way, since 1993, there is a discourse clash between or among the civilization by Huntington, and from that day to date, Muslims have been targeted. And then, if you see after 9/11, there are projects on which they were working, and still there are recruitment and radicalization of Muslims in the Europe. When such projects are working, they have to justify these kind of things. Second is, they fail to realize that the second or third generations in their countries, they are their origin. Why they say Pakistani origin? If something happened in England, something happened in Germany, something happened, they say Pakistani, Turkish origin. Why? They born there. They are from their civilization. So that is it means that their society failed to integrate them. So there are many problems. They try to blame the others. So secondly is, of course, religion is an important factor in the concept of nationalization. When we say if you try to link the nationalism with the ideology, then again Arslan there are certain things, but if you see, unfortunately, if you see the data of the refugees, 80% refugees are Muslims in the world. Now let's say Ukrainian or Christians are coming. And within that context, if you see what is after Second World War, Turks were invited by the Germans, and now they invite. So the refugees also contribute in their economy. But the question here is, which you raise, all these organizations, they are their proxies. If the international community, let's say American-led world or the others, including other countries, if they are sincere to get rid of this Islam, you can say radicalized militancy, I cannot say Muslim, but radicalized militancy, then they have to support the Afghan government. They have to support the projects like Uzbekistan, Pakistan railway track. They have to support the projects like Tapai. The reason is so that the Afghanistan from buffer zone become a transit area. So, but they want still that Afghanistan must remain a buffer zone where there must be sanctuaries of Al-Qaeda, Uzbek Islamic movement, Eastern Turkestan Islamic movement, or Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan. If that is the thing, so when you see these, and then they say, oh, they are Muslims, but they are not Muslims even. If you ask the Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan people, and I recall once I was discussing this issue with the ambassador of Pakistan, Tariq Aziz, who was kidnapped, and he said that these Talibs, when they stand up for a namaz, and once I asked them, do you know what is Alhamdulillah ar-Rahman? They say it's the work of the mullah, not Sahaba. We just follow that. That's the way of the Islam they are interpreting.
Sir, during the operations, when these militants were killed, honestly speaking, sir, let me use this and let me be very clear, they were not even circumcised.
Yeah.
So they, there's another...
So we have to be very careful when we see, and today in the conference when the Prime Minister was mentioning this, that we have to work together to get rid of this, you can say, targeting or Islamophobia, and then I think it's a big achievement. At least now we have after the United Nations passes of the resolution and the day to celebrate on every 15 March, now we have a forum. And on that forum we can raise, because these United Nations, OIC, they are political organizations. They work through the diplomacy and they work through the, you can say, diplomatic or moral persuasion. So we have no forum. From there we are able to highlight these things. But if you see that in the speech, Prime Minister rightly pointed out that among us people say, we are moderate, there are some fundamentalists, there are some radicalized. So when we ourselves start differentiating, we must be careful about it. And that's the OIC is a forum where we can, or we try to manage it. Second important thing is that in this context, now, of course, since 2005, from the OIC, the members of the OIC have been working on this agenda. But resolution was initiated and Prime Minister Imran Khan took it one of his, you can say, primary goal to achieve when he went to the United Nations General Assembly, and then later on we have seen, and always we have seen in the discussions. But now there's an achievement. But again, earlier as the Ambassador was right, he was pointing out that we have now something done, but there is still
there's a long way to go.
Long way to go. And how we have to implement, of course, we need to work over it, we need to develop the think tank. But at the same time, look what is happening. In Pakistan, we have a madrasas. Maybe 1% or 2% madrasas have a militant inside them, or they're creating the militant. But other madrasas are not creating. It's a traditional institution. But when you say madrasa, it has given an impression, or it becomes a pejorative
as if they're all radicalized.
Yeah. So these are the issues which we have to get rid of.
I think the change in the curriculum also helped a lot. So let's see what the lady has to share regarding this. Helga, let me put a very straight question to you here. Now, tell us, I mean, being a woman living in Europe, what exactly do you think about the religion Islam, your perception, how you perceive it?
Well, I think it's one of the three great monotheist religions. It's building on, Judaism and Christianity. And I think that, the ecumenical dialogue among these three religions is very important as a potential peace factor in the world. I think the Prime Minister Imran Khan said something very important. He said that the OIC should unite and together with China put maximum influence and pressure on both Ukraine and Russia in order to have a ceasefire and come to an agreement. I think that's a perfect example how Islam can play a very positive role as a peace, as an instrument of peace. On the negative side, I think one problem, and this was also mentioned, that the Islamic world did not correct the narrative which started to build after 9/11. I think that is still a task, because 9/11 was not as it was presented in the official narrative, and the war against Afghanistan. I mean, if you think about the number of people in Afghanistan who were involved in this war, it's very little, if any at all. I mean, they in any case, I think the origin of 9/11 is a big question, which would really need to be analyzed much more in depth. Then naturally, one cannot forget that Samuel Huntington, in his book The Clash of Civilization, I mean, he said when the East-West conflict was finished after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that basically one needed to replace the East-West conflict with a North-South conflict. And then he started to talk about this so-called unsurmountable, conflicts between Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Confucianism. And I read this terrible book, and I came to the conclusion that Huntington knows very little about all of these religions and cultures. But nevertheless, this was instigated as a tool of the British Empire. And in the case of Afghanistan, you can see very clearly, that what is being said about the Taliban as compared to the actual terrorist organizations in Afghanistan is all part of the great game. So I think, I think it's important to look behind what is being said. I think Islam as a religion, is a very positive thing. And as you may know, and I mentioned this on an earlier show, I think the reason why I called for Operation Ibn Sina, reviving the image of this great physician who is one of the absolute great minds of universal history. I mean, that would not only help to solve the medical problem in Afghanistan and reconstruct Afghanistan, but I think if Islamic countries would start to discuss the great contributions which were part of the history of Islam, like Ibn Sina, I think you not just should be defensive about saying that the Islamophobia is wrong and unjust, but I think it would be important to reconnect to the proudest periods of Islamic condition, like the Abbasid dynasty, which was Baghdad at that time was the most developed city in the world. There were more libraries, more books, all the great inventions from the previous time were revived. The caliphs basically, paid everybody in gold who would bring an invention from Egypt or from Spain or from other places. And, without the contact between Harun al-Rashid, for example, and Charlemagne, Karl der Große, the Europeans would not have rediscovered their own great heritage. So I think, rather than being just defensive and saying this is an unjust, vilification of one of the great religions, I think it would make a lot of sense to take a more positive and, in one sense, more offensive attitude by reviving the great Islamic contributions to world history. And given the fact that you had the Abbasid dynasty, you had Ibn Sina, who was, a great metaphysical philosopher. I would, if I would be a Muslim woman, that's what I would propose.
All right. Helga, if I might put a very interesting question, it was just popping in my mind. I can see you wearing a scarf around your neck, right? So if you put that scarf over your head, do you think your government or your neighbors or anybody else is going to have an issue? Because I'm not going to do India bashing here that they have not, they're not allowing the female Muslims to wear a scarf. Now the problem is that look what happened in France when the girls were not allowed to cover their head. I'm not saying cover your face, but even during the pandemic, everybody was covering their face, wearing a glass, wearing your glasses. I mean, nothing was visible. I mean, that is also acceptable. But when you use that scarf to cover your head, that becomes a problem for the Western world, and especially for the non-Muslims. Do you think is that an issue or a non-issue?
Well, I think it's definitely something which should be left to the respective religions to figure out. I'm a strong believer in the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, the UN Charter. I believe in sovereignty, in non-interference in the other affairs of other countries. I believe in the acceptance of a different social system. I think the Afghanistan disaster has shown, among many, many others, that you cannot impose your values on another culture without causing havoc and terrible conditions. On the other side, I'm a modern woman, obviously, and I think that the reason why the Europeans or some Europeans make an issue out of it is because they see see this as a sign of the suppression of the women. And there is something to be done for the liberation of women. There is no question about it. But, I think in all of these questions, once you understand the reasons why the representative of the other culture is doing something and you explain your own position, I'm sure that you always can come to an understanding and a solution. So for me, this issue is really not one of the pressing issues. I think it's important for some people, but
yeah. Interestingly, I've studied in missionary schools, and we used to have these nuns. We used to call them sisters and mothers, like we used to call fathers and brothers there, and they would cover their head. I mean, if a rabbi can have such a long beard and can have a certain style of a cap, whatever you call it, that's okay, and you're fine with it. A Sikh can wear a turban. I mean, I fail to understand. I mean, this is like, it seems that the Muslims are targeted. In particular, sir, if you allow me, sir, we've been joined in by Dr. Huma Baqai Sahiba. She's a senior analyst. Ma'am, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ma'am, thank you so much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. First of all, ma'am, let's talk about this 48th OIC Moot that is being held in Islamabad. Perhaps the major issues which the Muslim Ummah is facing, they've all discussed, including Islamophobia. Since I'm focusing on Islamophobia at the moment, ma'am. Ma'am, your take. Do you think today's session was fruitful in exactly presenting the true picture of the religion and the hate that over a period of time has been developed for the Muslims through various means, whether it's the Western media or otherwise. Do you think that could come to an halt eventually after some time if we, if we have the right course of action?
Before you bring things to a halt, you need to get them registered. You need to get them acknowledged. You need to make sure that they are recognized, acknowledged, and there is a global response to it. So the fact that we have 15th March as a day to fight against Islamophobia, and it has happened through resolutions of the United Nations, and you kept hearing about it in the OIC summit, is indicative of the fact that finally the sentiments and the sensibilities of the Muslim world were articulated, and not just articulated but recognized and tabled as a resolution, which resulted in the at least a complete understanding by the international community that yes, this is an issue. Prior to this was not even recognized as an issue. It was sort of linked with freedom of speech somehow, and the fact that it hurt the Muslim sentiment was never factored into the discussion. So I think that's a great thing that has happened. More importantly, I know that OIC summits have happened in the past, and unfortunately, I have grown up saying that OIC is a paper tiger, which comes up with a lot of resolutions which do not really get translated on the ground. But this particular summit that is happening in Islamabad after 2 decades just sounds and looks different. And for the reason behind it is that the presence of the Chinese foreign minister in this summit and the speech that has made can actually turn the page, because he very categorically spoke about South-South cooperation and how this whole thrust of unity, justice and development, as the summit is titled, will have the force of an upcoming superpower behind it. And you see, the Muslim world is fractured. There are fault lines. And this particular summit somehow seems to cement those fault lines. They're coming together on issues. They're speaking with one voice. So what I'm hoping is that this gets translated into action. And one last thing that I'd like to say, Faisal Rehman Saab, is that Pakistan has the privilege and the honor of now heading this for 1 year. And I think this is a great opportunity for Pakistan to take what Imran Khan Saab has done forward in ways where we emerge as the voice of the Muslim Ummah and the voice of whatever is wrong with the Muslim world, perhaps.
Dr. Huma, Baqai, do you believe that the credit goes to Pakistan and in particular to Prime Minister Imran Khan for bringing so many foreign ministers to Pakistan and for hosting it again? This is the OIC conference I'm talking about. Do you think that now things would change? Because we all had this impression of OIC that it's a useless body, I'm sorry to say, because they've never been able to do anything. But now the issue regarding Kashmir, that is highlighted, along with Afghan issue and Palestinian issue and all the issues which are being faced by the Muslim Ummah, in particular again regarding Islamophobia and so on and so forth. Do you think now, after this particular 48th session, this particular mood, things would change? The authority is going to be there, and at least a collective voice that should be heard all around the globe. That collective voice will have some sort of weightage now.
Well, if you put our political biases aside, nobody can deny the fact that Imran Khan Saab has emerged as the voice for the Muslim world. He has said and done things for the Muslim world which are unprecedented. His speeches, not just at the OIC summit, but also in the UN General Assembly, have been historic. And they have resonated with the Muslims, not just the leadership, but with the Muslims all over the world. So I think that has turned the tide in some ways. But you know, the taste of the pudding lies in eating it. We still need to translate this very positive sentiment that you talk about or we witness in the summit into reality on the ground. What I'm saying is that it is perhaps in the making. The agenda of this summit is is slightly different from the past. We're talking about Afghanistan, we're talking about Kashmir and Palestine, but we're also talking about transfer of capitals and money laundering and how that has harmed the Muslim world. We're also talking about how the Muslim world should come together to actually reflect the number of people it actually represents. It's the second largest governmental organization in the world. It should raise to that stature. It should be doing things. It should be throwing its weight around. All that needs to be done. Right now, the optics are such that this seems like a possibility.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Huma Baqai, for your input in our program. Thank you very much once again. Sir, talking about the future course of action now. Great mood. At least they have recognized, as they say in management, that if you know your problem, half your problem is solved. So at least they have recognized what the issue is. So workable strategy for the future course of action. What do you think? What needs to be done now? There has to be constant and consistent effort.
Right. The first thing I would say on that is that remember the OIC when it started in 1974 is very different to what it is now in 2022. And I will throw in the old adage, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. So all of this development that has taken place hasn't just happened out of the blue. It has been, the OIC has been reacting, and it's actually maybe woken up to this, because everybody, whether it was a rich lady from the Gulf states having a headscarf ripped off in a Paris salon, this kind of hate was everywhere. I'm not saying it's mainstream, but it was very much there. So the fact is that Islamophobia affected rich and poor alike. You get taken to the side because you look suspicious, or you have a certain, you've been to these countries. So all of that is there. So once you have this, there is the observatory. Now you also have this, if the OIC sets up and has a special, a rapporteur, a special person that is appointed specifically for this job, and to keep reporting and not just issuing reports. But this is exactly
based in the union.
No, based in the OIC. Okay. I mean, the OIC itself can decide where they can go and be based. But to be, not the best in every conference, but to be there to say, oh, look, you're doing this. And so you become a respected part of the UN human rights architecture, the international fora where you could speak up. But the thing that I would also highlight here is that there was the issue of development. That was one of the themes. Now you will have the Muslim people will not have the respect unless they have the economic backing behind it.
Absolutely.
And so once you are economically strong and viable, so the OIC has to be an incubator of innovation. It has to be pushing, as you have Comstech, but more and more STEM, education for girls and boys. So once you have the Ummah moving in that direction, then many of these Islamophobia problems will not automatically solve themselves. So, for example, in years gone by, people could travel, the thinkers, the traders would travel across the Muslim world unimpeded. So why not? I mean, one of the things they could do now is to have an OIC visa for business people, for artists, for cultural people. So you have this connectivity which bolsters who you are as a civilization.
Student exchange programs
as a civilization. And once you have that self-confidence, that is one of the tangible steps that you could take to take on the wider issues. Otherwise, you're seen as, they've made a resolution, they'll come and complain. No, it has to be, you have to have a strong economic and societal developmental backing. And that is where I think these three themes are absolutely well tied in with each other, absolutely integrated. So if you're talking about justice, of course it has to be justice for communities. And I must say, there must be, wherever a Muslim, and it doesn't matter where the Muslim is facing persecution, the OIC must speak up. There must be no exceptions. And when we start making exceptions, that is where our critics, they come and say, well, you're not speaking up here, why aren't you speaking there? So it cannot be partisan. And I think it is the duty of everybody in the Ummah to speak for fellow followers of the Islamic faith, Muslim faith.
That's very, very important. Now, Dr. Saab, since I was talking about the future course of action, I think when you talk about these 57 Islamic countries, and let's talk about India also, where there are about 22 crore Muslims living, almost equal to the total population of Pakistan. I mean, UP has more population in general. Just imagine. I was just surprised to know that the total population of Africa, is equivalent to the population of India. Imagine. But now, sir, the problem is that again, the Muslim or the mosque or somebody, you know, in a different attire, you know, immediately is recognized as somebody who is a Muslim, and you know, that liking element doesn't exist there anymore for some reason. Maybe for whatever reasons, by design or whatever. But sir, now things have changed. We are living in this 21st century, sir, and this is almost the third decade of that. We have witnessed wars throughout, sir. We have seen the Arab Spring in the Muslim countries, from one corner to another. What I'm saying is, sir, that now do you think it's high time that, I'm not saying that the OIC should develop a military to counter the West, but what I'm saying is that they can do so many things, investments, education. You're an educationist yourself, so do you think that we should have some programs, you know, linked that instead of going to USA or heading towards UK, I mean, if somebody wants to study Islam, they can be sent to Egypt in that huge university, or something of similar sort, engineering programs, medicine for that matter. Chinese can help as far as innovation is concerned. I mean, there are so many different avenues where you can have a lot of cooperation. Dr. Saab?
I think that if you see, the Muslim world was entirely colonized during the last century, and that's why we are still living in a subjective political culture. That is very important. Even in Pakistan, somebody who has expertise in a language, English language, they say, oh, he is very good. I have heard
he's
many
educated.
People, yeah, I've heard many people, and many even educated people, when they don't have an argument, they say, oh, he is unable to speak English. So this is our subjective, or you can just
the mindset.
Second is that when you say these three words, that unity, Muslim world is lacking the unity. We have no common. Only we have a common on this Islamophobia, and when it started, when everyone started feeling the heat, when the elite of the Arab countries who wants to go and live in Paris, XYZ, and there they start facing the trouble. Then they start that, and when we start
to all sorts of issues.
So
yes.
on this issue, when we came up with a unity, United Nations agreed. We have 57 countries, and then even if we convince one or two countries, everything happened. That's why there was a consensus on that resolution. Second is justice. If you see in the world, now Ukraine is a new issue, but apart from Ukraine, in the last 3 decades, injustice has been at the height in the Muslim world. You start with the Kashmir, Palestine, you start with the Afghanistan, and even today there's injustice. Why the Afghanistan's assets have been frozen? So that is a problem. This is the second and third important. When you have no education, you have no development. And even today, if you see, in the first 500 universities or 300 universities of the world, there is not even a single Muslim country's university to compete with
one is from
them.
Ankara, that is at number 500 or something.
Nothing. The reason is that we are borrowing their
Is it lack of
theory.
R&D, or because they say we
there's
have a lot of resources, we have got a lot of money.
There's a lack of research and development, and plus,
if they can have the biggest mosque in the world, why don't you have a better university?
No, they have a lack of trust on themselves. That's why I said we are still subjects. For example, I give you a very simple example. Social sciences. Social sciences, a reflection of your society. Your own social scientists, since Chankyas or Chandragupta Maurya, there's established tradition that you need your own social scientist, not the borrowed. But we here borrowed the social scientists, their theories. We try to work on that. We get the, for example, even HSC has said, oh, you have a publication in external journal that has X or Y category, your own journals are not. You have to develop yourself, start thinking that how you have to improve your education.
You can't change things overnight. It is a long term.
And then when you go for a borrowed intellectuals, whether they are a person who are not working in this country, who hate to work in this country, and then you bring him back and say, okay, you make my policies. How he has no idea. Whether it's your financial policy, whether your economic policy, whether your education policy. You can we
We
have
talk
our
about
own
the
doctors.
indigenous mindsets.
Can you important? We have our own doctors, but we are not importing the doctors. They are doing well all over the world. So if our doctors and our engineers, they can do, why not our social scientists? Why not the others? Why don't we have a trust on our own indigenous production? So we have to work over it. Similarly, first of all, you have to focus on your own country. Then secondly, you have to link with the West. I can give you an example. I cannot name it. There was a graduate from this National Defense University and having some linkages with the Quaid-e-Azam. That guy was he involved for raising the National, you can say, Defense College. And he gave the list of the speakers from here, and they said, no, we need Americans, we need Europeans. So that is the problem. So Muslim world is
You need
suffering.
to believe in yourself.
No, we are not believing it. And secondly, yes, we have to admit this. In the education sector, we are lagging behind. And we are unable to improve. Even in Pakistan, you have 3-school system. You have a street school system, which you say English. Everyone wants to send, elite wants to send his children in that. You have a madrasa, you have a government. If the state school system will improve systematically, the things will start.
Deteriorated over a period
We
of
have
time,
a
sir.
universities. If the state
government schools were so good, sir.
yeah,
Now they're
and
not.
if the state universities will improve, then everything will improve. Because only state universities can afford labs. Quaid-e-Azam University has the labs. Your private sector university cannot afford a lab. That is the problem, that here we have this, even my country, we have delegated everything, education, security. Why in front of every house you have a security guard? State has to take a responsibility. The same is with the rest of the world.
There
So
has
then
to be,
you have
there
to
has to
come
be
up.
a lot of collective effort.
Yes.
Now, coming to you, Helga, last couple of minutes. As a foreigner, as a European, sitting abroad, I mean, since we were talking about that, I would not use the word lack of confidence, but perhaps because the Britishers, they ruled this area. In Africa, you talk about the Germans or the Dutch, as well as French. I mean, they all ruled. So that mindset, even after hundreds of years, I mean, it hasn't changed much. But I think this is a different world altogether. When I was in school, we were told that it is going to be a globalized world. And I was like, what is globalization is supposed to mean? Now we understand that this internet, this connectivity, this is the name of the game. God knows what 2030 or 2040 would look like, but change is something which is permanent. So do you think that the right direction is being followed now as far as the OIC is concerned, or the Muslim countries are related to it? And maybe in another couple of decades, things would really change for the betterment of the Muslims. We are not terrorists. We are not extremists. I mean, in general, yes, there are radicals in every society, in every religion. Let's keep them apart. But in general, do you think that if we focus on, like, for example, this year, they're talking about unity, justice, and development. I mean, there are so many themes every year, but focus, dedication, hard work, and commitment, that is what is required. Helga, your take.
Well, I would like to answer that question in the context of the time change which is occurring. You know, in Europe right now, you have a militarization of the EU going on, which I think is very scary because, you know, with the war in Ukraine, the sanctions against Russia, the effort to try to imply that China is helping Russia, what we are heading towards is the danger of a real bloc building, you know, where you have a NATO bloc with the United States and Europe and maybe some Australia and Japan, but then you have a Russia-China bloc. And given the fact that we have right now these sanctions, they are forcing practically a different financial system. You can already see that trade is occurring in renminbi and ruble. Other countries are starting to not trade in dollar anymore. I mean, if this thing goes wrong, you will have two complete blocs which will be hostile to each other. There will be a summit of NATO in June in Spain, where on the agenda is a globalized NATO. If that would go through, and right now, unfortunately, it looks like it, the danger that you have a war between these two blocs is, in my view, a question of time. And that would be a catastrophe for all of humanity. So I was very encouraged when Imran Khan said that the OIC should, work with China to try to mediate, because we need a new paradigm in international relations. I think that if we go into a geopolitical confrontation in the age of thermonuclear weapons, we could look at the annihilation of civilization. And on the other side, one of the speakers, I think it was Foreign Minister Qureshi, also mentioned the need for a new security architecture in the region of the Islamic world. But, I'm proposing to have an international security architecture for everybody. Every single country must be taken care of, because security pacts or security alliances only function if the interest of everyone is taken into account. So the Schiller Institute will have a very important conference on the 9th of April, and I want to invite all of your viewers to come and look at that. We will try to revive something like the non-aligned movement. We will have an effort to put new principles overcoming geopolitics on the international agenda. And I think the OIC, if they would really form a bloc and be unified, they are really strong. They could be one of the major forces in the world trying to not have this bloc building, but to move towards a higher principle of coincidence of opposites, of peaceful coexistence, reviving the principles of the non-aligned movement. Many of the OIC members used to be very strong, members in the non-aligned movement. And I think you need that kind of an intervention, because right now what is happening in Europe is really scary. The EU wants to become a military force. Germany turned into a war cabinet. I think this is a very dangerous development. And I know it's very difficult for somebody living in one culture to completely understand the importance of what is going on in other parts of the world. But right now, I think this dangerous moving towards a clash has to be avoided by all means.
Thank you very much, Helga, for your comments and for your participation in our program. Ambassador Saab, thank you so much for your presence as well, sir. Dr. Saab, thank you so much for your input as well. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow, because tomorrow is 23rd March. So we'll be having a live transmission, and definitely we would like you to be a part of it. And we'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.